Spring arrives with cherry blossoms in full bloom. Evangeline suddenly finds herself in another person's body, but how she died remains a mystery. She wasn't sick, overworked, or hit by a truck. It's as if she simply went to sleep and woke up in a new life. Now she has transmigrated into the body of Evangeline Ronson Wright in the middle of the girl's funeral. Naturally, everyone is terrified, thinking they've seen a ghost. With no memories of the original owner, Evangeline pretends to have amnesia to survive the situation. After being questioned by a priest and doctor, she brushes it off as a miracle or misdiagnosis. 2 days later, she still knows nothing about her new identity. However, one thing is clear: the original Evangeline was feared. Servants tremble, faint, and even beg for their lives in her presence. Evangeline concludes she may have possessed a villainess. Her red eyes, often seen as a cursed trait, don't help. On top of that, her father hasn't even appeared after her resurrection, suggesting a neglectful or abusive family. Hoping to understand her situation, she questions a maid named Daisy about her life fiancé, royalty, nobles, but learns nothing useful. No fiancé, no notable figures, nothing special. Worse, she can't even read the language of this world. Daisy promises to get her an alphabet book. Before that happens, Evangeline decides to search the mansion for clues, especially a hidden diary that might reveal the truth about her new life. It's time to explore the house. First, Evangeline checks her room carefully, then the bathroom, next, the painting room. But where is that damn diary? Thinking back, the maid Daisy mentioned something earlier while showing her around. The original owner had a room no one was allowed to enter. There had to be something inside. The door was sturdy, hard to open. Evangeline pulled with all her strength until it suddenly gave way, sending her falling to the ground. When she looked up, she froze. The scene was dark and unsettling. A rope hung from a tree branch. Pale legs swayed gently in the air. Evangeline Ronson, the Count's only daughter, was dead. Officially, it was illness. But no one who saw her hanging body beneath the blooming cherry blossoms believed it. The flowers that day were crimson. Beautiful, but wrong. Her funeral was quiet. No nobles, no mourning, just servants and a few knights. The cause of death was hidden, dismissed as something contagious. Then, in the silence, something moved, a faint rustling, a creak, bones shifting. Her body twitched, white hair fell like a tangled web. Then her eyes opened, deep red, unnatural, alive. Anyone who saw them froze in fear. The priest prayed, but nothing changed. The corpse moved, slowly, unnaturally. Her lips parted. "What is my name?" Something else had taken over. Back in the hidden room, Evangeline stared at a dark red stain spreading across the wooden floor. Blood. The space was dim, filled with books, tools, and a covered easel. Whatever happened here wasn't normal. Evangeline concluded the room was also a study. She lifted the cloth off the easel, curious if the drawings were Evangeline's. Since no one was allowed inside, everything had been carefully hidden. She even imagined the former owner secretly sketching, clutching her work like a shy person hiding a dark past. Her attention shifted to the bookshelf. If the drawings were hidden here, the diary had to be close. She began checking books one by one. She couldn't read the language yet, but she ruled things out: books with clear titles, thick volumes, or neatly printed text. Then she found it. A worn book with ink stains and messy handwritten numbers on the cover. This had to be the diary. Evangeline stared at it blankly, unimpressed by the terrible taste, then carefully tucked it away for later. As she moved it, a piece of parchment slipped out. It showed a strange circular pattern filled with unfamiliar symbols, a summoning circle. She froze, realizing this world might involve contracts with powerful beings, dragons, spirits, or worse. Clutching the diary, she decided one thing: if she wanted to survive, she would use whatever she found. Her eyes landed on an overturned bucket of crimson paint. Good enough. She ignored the brushes and used her fingers instead, dragging thick red lines across the wooden floor. Dragon or spirit. Anything powerful will do, she muttered. The paint slowly dripped from her fingers. Outside, the full moon hung over the Roundsen estate, pale light spilling into the silent mansion. Elsewhere, Count Roundsen sat behind his desk staring down at the trembling maid, Daisy. He said nothing. His expression was calm, unreadable. Daisy had once been close to his daughter, sharing quiet moments despite their difference in status. And now, she had chosen to be involved in something she could no longer escape. Daisy chose to stand by Evangeline, even knowing where it would lead. The ritual she performed was almost identical to the one the Count's daughter had once attempted. Count Roundsen suspected she had seen fragments of that thing within him. Pressing his hand to his forehead, he quietly wondered what it truly wanted. Daisy trembled as she gave her report. It asked about her age, habits, favorite foods, then wore Miss Evangeline's clothes and walked around like it was really her. But it wasn't perfect. From a distance, the maids either fainted or begged for their lives. The thing didn't care, in fact, it seemed amused by their fear. Its gaze held nothing but cold contempt, like it was looking at insects. That wasn't the Evangelina Daisy knew. The real one had been gentle and kind, never cruel. Shaking, Daisy apologized, but the Count calmly told her to continue. She explained that it claimed it couldn't read, likely just to send her away. But when she returned, it was already back in the locked room, somehow, inside, calmly, reading. When she looked closer, she saw it kneeling on the floor, drawing a strange pattern with blood-stained fingers, whispering something under its breath. As she leaned in to hear, it looked straight at her. That was enough. Fear took over. The Count fell silent, thinking about contracts and rituals. Anger burned within him. Was that thing trying to summon something else now? Everything began the moment his daughter took her own life. Because it was ruled a suicide, she couldn't be properly buried. Rumors spread that an evil spirit had taken her body. Worse, the thing showed no reaction to holy water. With no other choice, the Count decided to observe it for now. He ordered Daisy to stay close and watch it. As she stood there, eyes tightly shut, he noticed, "Why are your eyes closed?" Daisy whispered, trembling. "It's been staring at me this whole time." The Count's expression hardened. "It's been staring at me this whole time." Count Roundsen stiffened. "Staring at you?" He turned sharply toward the door, and in the darkness, something stared back. A mass of cold, inhuman eyes opened at once, all fixed on him. Then nothing. Evangeline stood quietly in the soft light, calm as ever. She lifted a plump cat in her hands. It meowed cheerfully, its bright blue eyes shining. "A three-eyed cat chose me?" she muttered, half in disbelief. Even so, she smiled and petted it, and she was undeniably cute. Soon, she was hugging it, burying her face in its soft fur, rolling on the bed without restraint. "I love cats," she mumbled happily. A knock sounded. Evangeline instantly composed herself and sat upright as a maid entered. It wasn't the same one as before. Trying to ease the tension, she casually asked if there were many cats in the estate. "There used to be," the maid replied coldly. "They were all killed." Evangeline froze. The maid explained there had been an epidemic blamed on cats. A bad feeling hit her. The cat was still in the room. "Wait," she said quickly. "Did I just hear a cat?" the maid asked, frowning. Evangeline forced a calm expression. "No." Another soft meow echoed. Inside, she panicked, silently begging the cat to stay quiet. Fortunately, the maid left without checking further. Only then did Evangeline let out a breath, clutching her chest as her heart slowed. She had planned to secretly keep and pamper the cat, but now it was clear. If anyone found out that the cat would be killed. Holding it close, she hesitated. Chasing it away meant certain death. Keeping it meant risk. "I'll just say it's been approved by a priest or doctor," she decided. No one would dare harm the Count's daughter's pet. Just then, a servant appeared and informed her that the Count was too busy to see her. Right. He disliked his own daughter. Watching the servant bow deeply, Evangeline grew confused. Just how badly had the original owner treated people? "There's no need to be afraid," she said lightly. "I won't hit you." The servant looked startled. Evangeline sighed and shook her head. No point overthinking everything. For now, she had one goal: raise this cat. "Is keeping a cat not allowed?" she asked. The servant hesitated. "It's not forbidden, but—" Nearby, the cat calmly drank water from the bowl, unaware of the tension around it. The servant explained it would normally be examined, but the butler allowed it since it had drunk holy water. Evangeline watched in disbelief. If holy water could prevent the illness, then all those cats had died for nothing. After confirming, the servant left. Looking down at the cat, she asked softly, "You're safe now, right?" The maid hesitated, then suggested putting a collar with its name on it to protect it from other servants. Evangeline brightened. "That's a great idea." But when she admitted she couldn't read or embroider, the maid quickly excused herself and left. Left alone, Evangeline realized something. She was being avoided. Sighing, she apologized to the cat for being a useless owner and decided her first goal was to learn how to read. That night passed quietly. The next morning, everything changed. Evangeline suddenly found she could read perfectly. Shocked but happy, she immediately tried to embroider the cat's name. Moments later, she slumped in defeat. The collar was completely ruined. The stitches were crooked and unreadable. The cat meowed loudly, pawing at the mess as if protesting. "You still want to wear this?" she asked. To her surprise, the cat accepted it happily. Evangeline stared, then laughed softly. "You're really an angel." She fastened the crooked collar and hugged the cat tightly. "In that case, your name is Pudding." For the first time, she smiled warmly. In her previous life, she couldn't keep a cat, but now she finally could.
In the dim candlelight, the maid bit her finger, thinking that if she had holy water, her young sister might finally recover. She couldn't believe Evangeline would waste something so valuable so casually. Then a voice whispered from the darkness, asking if she wanted it. Startled, she looked around. From the window, a cat with glowing eyes stared at her, repeating that she could have it if she truly desired it. Meanwhile, Evangeline walked alone in the quiet garden as petals drifted through the air. A new day beginning. From inside, the maid watched her for a moment before quietly closing the curtains. Soon, news spread that Count Ronson had fled the mansion, terrified, claiming he saw strange eyes inside. Daisy also left, refusing even a recommendation, choosing instead to enter a convent. The estate was left under the butler's care, whose only duty now was to watch the being posing as Lady Evangeline. Hannah was assigned to stay close and observe her. Desperate for money, she accepted the role despite what happened to Daisy. She reported hearing cats, even though all of them were supposedly dead. The butler, unable to hear anything, grew suspicious. Despite everything, Hannah refused to leave. She needed the job for her sick sibling. When the butler told her to feed holy water to a cat he wanted to raise, she fell silent. That same voice returned, offering her what she wanted. Realizing it was a monster, something connected to Evangeline, Hannah hesitated. She considered reporting it, but a reward wouldn't be enough to save her sibling. In the end, she obeyed the creature. She replaced the real holy water with a fake and secretly kept the real one. It worked. Her sibling recovered. Hannah continued serving quietly, ignoring the strange cat and the unsettling lady. The pay was good and her sibling was healthy. That was enough. Meanwhile, Evangeline became obsessed with strange books, hopping to find summoning magic. But the spellbook she found turned out to be an old diary from over 20 years ago, filled with a tragic love story instead of magic. Frustrated, she set it aside until she noticed something missing. The spell page was gone. When she asked, Hannah mentioned that Dono had entered the room the previous day and hadn't been seen since. Evangeline's expression darkened. She had an idea of what had happened. Elsewhere, in a quiet house at night, someone drew a summoning circle with blood, laughing softly while a bound figure struggled nearby. A red-haired girl lay bound and gagged on the floor, helpless. Outside, the slum buzzed with chaos. A drunk shouting for more alcohol, a passerby yelling at him to keep quiet, and a beggar stretching out a trembling hand for a coin. Two guards complained about their patrol as the drunk staggered toward them. Nearby, a cloaked figure muttered in frustration, struggling to finish a drawing. Their attention shifted when a carriage passed. It looked like the Rohanson families, which made no sense in the slums. Inside the carriage, Evangeline fumed, urging the driver to go faster. Henna sat calmly beside her while Pudding rested nearby. Evangeline swore the thief would pay. They stopped at a rundown building. Without hesitation, Evangeline kicked the door open. Inside, a red-haired girl lay tied up, whimpering. A dark-haired man knelt over a blood-drawn summoning circle, laughing unnaturally while holding a knife. The girl, Kana, Henna's sister, had been lured earlier after following Pudding, thinking she was feeding a stray cat. Instead, she was captured by the man, who now prepared to use her as a sacrifice. He ranted wildly, claiming the spell was real and that Evangeline's resurrection proved demons existed. He believed Count Ronson made a pact for money and planned to use the same power to rise above him. As Kana struggled, the man began the ritual, chanting while forcing her into the circle. Blood spread across the floor as the incantation intensified. Light suddenly burst from the circle, and a radiant figure appeared. But it wasn't what he expected. Evangeline had arrived. She looked around, irritated, saying she only came to retrieve her stolen spell, not deal with a kidnapping. Realizing Kana was Henna's sister, her expression hardened. Evangeline stepped forward, drawing the man's attention, and calmly told him to state his wish. Desperate, he demanded wealth and luxury. Thinking quickly, she offered something better, becoming part of the Rohanson family. The man hesitated, tempted, then twisted the idea further, deciding he could just take the Count's place himself. With a crazed grin, he grabbed Kana and raised his knife to seal the deal. Before he could strike, Evangeline moved instantly, hitting him and sending him crashing across the room. The knife flew from his hand and he collapsed, unconscious. Evangeline stared at him coldly, briefly wondering if she should have finished him off. But seeing he wasn't moving, she decided she'd simply gotten lucky. Henna rushed forward in panic, calling Kana's name as she dropped to her knees and tried to untie the ropes. Her hands trembled, the knots too tight to loosen. Evangeline stepped in calmly and told her to move aside. With steady hands, she quickly freed Kana. Henna immediately pulled her sister into a tight embrace, checking her in relief and scolding her for being outside despite her condition. Kana apologized weakly, saying she never expected something like this to happen. Evangeline watched them quietly, feeling relieved, but kept her composure. She asked what to do with Dono and casually suggested locking him away. Before they could decide, Dono suddenly grabbed the fallen knife and lunged. Henna cried out, but in the next moment blood sprayed. Evangeline didn't move. Dono collapsed forward. He had slit his own neck. Evangeline sighed, slightly annoyed that he died before facing punishment. Kana, however, said it was enough and thanked Evangeline for saving her. Evangeline awkwardly admitted it felt surprisingly rewarding. Then Henna pointed out the obvious. The house was on fire. Realizing too late, they rushed outside as flames spread rapidly. Evangeline suspected the summoning circle caused it, possibly a fire spirit. Watching the burning house, she realized the stolen spell was likely destroyed inside, thinking her dream of becoming overpowered might be over. Later, Kana reflected on her past, her frail body, her parents' sacrifices, and Henna's efforts to save her. The holy water from Evangeline had cured her, though it also left her conflicted. Still, seeing Evangeline rescue her again felt like salvation. As the house burned, onlookers gathered until knights arrived to control the scene. Among them was a striking man who stood out, Gabriel, commander of the knights. He approached Evangeline and questioned her presence. Kana stepped forward to defend her, but Evangeline gently stopped her and explained she came looking for a servant, now dead inside the fire. Kana then told the story clearly. She was kidnapped, and Evangeline came to rescue her. Gabriel listened and seemed to accept it. But Evangeline suddenly felt uneasy. Realizing this situation felt exactly like the beginning of a story. Evangeline suddenly realized something important. Kana was the female lead. This kidnapping was supposed to be the moment the male lead saved her, and she had ruined it. She thought to herself that even if they were just characters in a story, she could never have stood by and let Kana be taken. Still, it meant she had now become the villain who disrupted the original plot. Kana calmly told Gabriel they would be leaving, while Evangeline wondered if Kana seemed distant toward him because of her interference. Before leaving, she told Gabriel he could visit House Rohanson if anything came up. Gabriel remained still, watching her go. At first, he had mistaken her for a statue, too perfect, too lifeless for a place like this. But when she looked at him with those red eyes and spoke, he realized she was very much alive, yet strangely empty. The only person she showed any real concern for was Kana, and Kana's devotion to her felt almost unsettling. Soon after, a knight reported something strange. The fire had burned only that house and then stopped on its own. They also found a body and a scorched summoning circle. Gabriel studied the mark quietly, thinking it almost resembled an angel made of ash. Elsewhere, a struggling painter became obsessed with what he saw in the flames, a charred, angel-like figure. Believing it was inspiration, he rushed home and began painting, convinced it was his calling. Back at the Rohanson estate, Kana and Henna were offered a place to stay. Though uneasy, Henna agreed. Kana, now cheerful, chose a room below Evangeline's. Later that night, Kana thanked her sister, admitting she had been truly afraid. Henna held her tightly, feeling guilty for ever doubting her. Meanwhile, Evangeline wrote a letter, deciding to get close to Kana instead of the male lead. She figured it was the safest way to avoid her villainous fate. After some manipulation, she managed to secure permission for Kana and Henna to stay. Satisfied, she imagined a peaceful life ahead. But that illusion shattered instantly. Gabriel suddenly appeared before her and said calmly that some people might suspect her involvement in Dono's death. Evangeline froze, realizing her peaceful escape plan might already be falling apart. A servant brought a letter from a knight requesting to see Evangeline. Reading it, she frowned. Gabriel wanted to meet again over the Dono case. She wondered why, since everything had already been explained. Kana bristled at the idea of a knight summoning her lady, while Henna warned her to be careful with her words. Evangeline, however, decided to meet him casually and subtly show her support for Kana, hoping to keep herself out of the main story's spotlight. When Gabriel arrived, he greeted her politely. Evangeline replied calmly and offered to call Kana if he was concerned about her condition. Gabriel dismissed it, saying the girl didn't seem badly hurt, something that clearly irritated Kana. He then revealed the real issue. Dono's death had become complicated. Placing a rough sketch on the table, Gabriel explained that Dono's body had been found in a strange position, almost like wings spread out. Because of that, rumors began spreading that he had received a divine blessing. Evangeline stared at the drawing in disbelief. It looked nothing like an angel to her. Gabriel continued. A painter had turned the scene into artwork and donated it to the temple, fueling the rumors. Now, some were even suggesting Dono should be enshrined. The church had ordered a reinvestigation. If Dono were declared blessed, then his death couldn't be treated as a crime, and suspicion would instead fall on Evangeline, accusing her of manipulating his death. Evangeline clenched her hand, thinking bitterly that everything was pushing her into the role of a villainess. Gabriel then asked her directly if she had told him the full truth. She knew changing her story now would only make things worse. So instead, she asked if he believed she had lied. Gabriel admitted he didn't believe Dono was blessed, but his death was undeniably strange. Then, to her surprise, he said he wanted to help her. Evangeline was caught off guard. Noticing his slightly awkward expression, she immediately recognized the situation. This felt like a flag, the kind that could drag her deeper into the story. Panicking, she bluntly told him she wasn't interested in him. Gabriel calmly replied that he already knew, but still found her fascinating. Trying to refocus, Evangeline explained again that everything started from Kana's kidnapping and the stolen paper. She mentioned the strange circle she saw and asked if he knew what it was. Gabriel answered simply, it was a summoning circle, though no one truly knew what it summoned. Evangeline shrugged and casually suggested it might have summoned an angel. Silence filled the room. Gabriel repeated that he wanted to help her. Evangeline looked at him coldly and told him to know his place, making it clear she had no interest. Yet even then, Gabriel remained intrigued, as if drawn to something unnatural about her. After leaving the mansion, he couldn't shake the strange feeling. Rumors about Evangeline resurfaced in his mind, stories that she had once died and come back to life, tied to a priest who later died mysteriously himself. As his carriage moved through the quiet streets, Gabriel reflected on everything. Among the burned remains of the evidence, one line from the spell paper had survived. A single, incomplete sentence hinting at something far more dangerous still left unresolved. Gabriel quietly repeated the word angel, recalling how Evangeline had casually said the summoned being must have been one. If the summoning circle truly called something that could grant wishes, then it wasn't unheard of, at least not before the Great Purge that wiped out most such rituals. He couldn't even remember exactly when that purge happened. Maybe when he was a child or even earlier. Turning to Raphael, he was about to ask about magic rituals, but the carriage suddenly jolted to a stop. A cat had leapt into the road. The horses reared, and Raphael quickly jumped down, checking if Gabriel was hurt. The coachman apologized repeatedly, explaining what happened. The cat simply walked off into a narrow alley, its tail swaying as if nothing had occurred. Gabriel brushed it off calmly, though Raphael admitted his heart nearly stopped. Once things settled, they prepared to move again, but Gabriel couldn't shake the thought. Was it really just coincidence that this happened right when they mentioned magic? The next morning, the central temple stood quietly under soft sunlight. In the courtyard, attendants swept fallen leaves while chatting about a holy painting inside the main hall. Rumors surrounded it. Some said it rejected those without faith. A young lady had fainted after seeing it, claiming she met the sun god in a dream. Even the Palos Knights had taken interest. One knight was reportedly thrown back just by standing before it. The painter had even been rewarded generously by the high priest. Nearby, a young nun warned Daisy about Father Berga, calling him dangerous and advising her to stay away. Daisy thanked her quietly. Later, in the quiet temple library, Daisy decided to remain there through the night, avoiding trouble. She still hadn't forgotten the terror she experienced at the Rohanson mansion. But as she left the library with a lantern, two figures appeared in the dark. They addressed her as sister and insisted she follow them, claiming Father Berga had called for her. As they walked, their words didn't make sense. Daisy quickly realized something was wrong. This wasn't an official summons. Before she could react, she was shoved to the ground. The men began preparing something, a ritual. One of them spread dark powder across the floor, completing a summoning circle. Daisy froze in horror. She recognized it immediately. Memories of the mansion flooded back, the countless watching eyes, the overwhelming dread. She knew she had to stop it. No matter what, acting on instinct, she struck, shattering a nearby statue and attacking to interrupt the ritual. But things went wrong. Blood spilled onto the circle and it reacted. Daisy stared in shock, realizing she had triggered it instead. Fear consumed her. Killing a priest was an unforgivable crime. If she were caught, she would be executed. There was no escape. Desperate, she wished for help, and something answered. A presence appeared behind her, not human, but a mass of long, shifting hair. From the darkness, a grotesque mouth stretched into a grin. It leaned close and whispered softly, asking if she needed help. Before Daisy could scream again, a dark hand shot forward and covered her mouth. The shadowy creature covered Daisy's mouth, silencing her scream. It leaned close with a twisted smile and whispered that she needed to stay quiet. It reminded her she didn't want to get caught, right? If she stayed silent, it would let her go. Daisy, trembling, wondered what it even was. It didn't feel human. Still, she forced herself to stay calm and play along. When she asked about the man, the creature replied it meant the one with countless eyes, Pharaohs. Daisy froze, recalling what she had seen before. The creature smiled, realizing she understood. It told her she would have to take it to him. Then it added coldly she had already made a wish. Now she had to pay the price. Daisy's gaze shifted to the priest's corpse, blood soaking his robes. The creature mocked it, calling it a poor sacrifice. Then, almost casually, something horrifying happened. With a quiet motion, it severed the heads of the two priests outside, then placed them back as if nothing had happened. The bodies kept walking. Daisy gagged in terror. The creature laughed, clearly enjoying her reaction. Shaking, Daisy pointed toward the Rohanson mansion, saying that was likely where it would find what it wanted. The creature smiled, saying it could already smell it. Before leaving, it told Daisy to call again if she ever needed help, but next time it would cost more. Left alone, Daisy stood frozen. Later, in a carriage, the coachman turned and asked where she wanted to go, his neck marked by a thin line of blood. Daisy quietly answered that she wanted to return to the temple. Elsewhere, Evangeline discovered an injured wolf lying in the garden, its body marked with glowing wounds. To her surprise, it spoke, begging her to save it. She quickly assumed the obvious: this must be a werewolf, probably even an important character. For a moment, she imagined a whole story, Kana saving the wounded wolf, leading to some romantic development. Then she froze. What if she interfered again? Deciding not to ruin things further, she turned to call Kana, but the wolf begged again, weakly. Evangeline hesitated. She couldn't just leave it. Suddenly, they were inside her room. The wolf had teleported them. Accepting it without much thought, she knelt to treat him. But as she reached out, the wolf transformed into a wounded man. The injury was worse than she expected. She considered calling a doctor, then remembered something. Calling Pudding, the cat brought her a vial of holy water. Evangeline praised it happily and took the bottle. She approached the man and gently offered it, telling him to drink. Tilting her head, she wondered why he hesitated, as if he had never seen something like it before. Evangeline noticed his hesitation and assumed he had never seen holy water before. She told him not to be picky and forced the bottle to his lips, making him drink. She kept pouring it in, cheerfully telling him to endure the taste while he coughed and struggled. Then she suddenly paused, realizing she had forgotten something important. "What's your name?" she asked. But the man could barely respond, still coughing. Evangeline simply assumed that as a beast folk, he might not even be used to speaking. After a moment of thought, she smiled and decided to name him herself. "From now on, your name is Jelly." Man lay there. Stunned and speechless, night fell over the Rohanson mansion. The estate grew quiet as staff finished their duties, closing curtains and putting out lights. Tonight, Olive was assigned to the 4th floor. Walking alone with a lantern, she nervously recalled someone saying that floor wasn't scary and wondered why they would lie. The long corridor stretched into darkness. Strange moaning sounds echoed faintly, growing louder as she walked. One by one, the lights flickered out, her breath hitched. Sweat slid down her face, then her foot stepped into something wet. She froze. Blood. The floor was stained with it. As she recoiled in terror, she slipped, nearly falling. A hand suddenly grabbed her shoulder. Kana stood behind her, steadying her calmly. She pointed toward the staircase and warned that Olive could have fallen. Then she told her gently to go back inside. The night was dangerous. Shaken, Olive thanked her and hurried away. But when she reached the others, they looked confused. They told her no one else was on duty tonight. She was the last one. Olive froze. She remembered Kana's words and slowly realized something was wrong. A chilling thought spread through the mansion. At night, those who wander the halls are not human. From then on, a warning passed quietly among the staff. Never carry a lantern at night. Meanwhile, Evangeline slept peacefully in her room. Her silver hair spread across the pillow as the mansion fell into an uneasy silence. A dark shadow slowly stretched across the curtain beside Evangeline's bed, its distorted shape looming over her sleeping figure. Elsewhere in the room, Jelly trembled in pain, coughing violently as blood splattered onto the floor. The holy water burned through him like fire. He clenched his body, staring at the strange crimson patterns above, realizing he couldn't resist whatever force was suppressing him. Then he saw her, Evangeline. Her presence alone filled the room with overwhelming pressure. Jelly understood instantly. This was the one who had subdued Andras and forced even Floros to act like a harmless cat. Whatever she wasn't normal. Pudding, now in human form, calmly told him to be quiet. Jelly snapped back, blaming the holy water, but before things escalated, Kana quietly entered and asked them to keep the noise down. Reluctantly, Jelly fell silent. Morning arrived. Evangeline woke up and sighed in relief, convincing herself that the strange presence she felt at night was just sleep paralysis. She brushed it off as another oddity of this world and hugged Pudding, greeting him warmly. That peaceful moment didn't last long. Jelly suddenly appeared beside the bed, complaining loudly. Evangeline immediately told him to get off and refused to share her bed with a grown man. Jelly protested, pointing out that Pudding could also turn human. Evangeline froze, then slowly looked at Pudding. "Is that true?" Pudding nodded happily. Without hesitation, she hugged him even tighter, until he suddenly transformed into a small blonde boy, looking up at her nervously. She paused, then sighed in relief. At least he was a child. Reassuring him, she smiled and patted his head, promising she wouldn't hate him. Pudding brightened instantly. While Jelly watched in disbelief and irritation, Kana soon entered the room and greeted Evangeline politely, offering to help with anything. Evangeline awkwardly refused, not wanting to act like a typical villainess, but Kana insisted. It was her way of repaying kindness. After thinking for a moment, Evangeline asked Kana to check on Gabriel's progress regarding the investigation. She handed her a pouch of money, telling her to use it freely. Kana was shocked. It was far more than expected. But Evangeline simply smiled and told her to be careful later. Kana and Henna rode into town, taking in the lively streets. Kana pressed her face to the window, excited by everything she saw, while Henna watched her quietly, relieved to finally see her happy. Kana held the pouch tightly, determined to enjoy the moment. She had spent most of her life sick and confined. This was all new to her. Henna gently suggested they visit a few shops on their way back. Kana agreed happily, hugging her sister. When they arrived at the grand cathedral, people nearby whispered, noticing their carriage. Some assumed they were from House Rohanson, while others mocked the rumors about the sickly daughter. A man approached and politely
asked Kana if she was the young lady from House Rohanson. Henna politely corrected the man and explained that he must have mistaken them because they arrived in a carriage. They were only the young lady's maids. The man smiled lightly and crossed his arms, saying he understood and that it made sense now. The man laughed mockingly and said that the two of them actually looked more like the young lady of House Rohanson than the real one. Henna looked uneasy and thought to herself that this never would have happened if she had not agreed to stop by the boutique. The man sneered and accused them of dragging the young lady's name through the mud, saying that someone sent to the great temple should at least be wearing decent clothes. The man continued spreading rumors that House Rohanson was loaded with debts, while Henna felt frustrated that Kana had to stand there and listen to such trash. Henna's eyes widened slightly as tension rose, a drop of sweat forming while she realized the situation was becoming dangerous. Kana stood silently, with a cold expression, her posture stiff as anger slowly rose within her. The man laughed mockingly and brought up Evangeline's maternal family, sneering that if she truly came from the Hosequin Duchy, she should at least be rich enough to buy proper clothes for her maids. Henna glanced at Kana's face and felt uneasy, realizing she had never seen that cold expression on her sister before. Henna suddenly remembered a similar look from before, the moment when Kana had knocked a man to the ground without hesitation. Henna felt a chill run down her spine as she wondered if Kana might actually kill the man right there. Henna lowered her head, clutching her arm as unease crept into her chest, silently praying that things would not turn out the way she feared. A crowd gathered before the grand cathedral, their murmurs rising softly as people from noble houses and distant towns alike arrived for the ceremony. Henna paused and looked around, confused by the sudden silence, wondering why the lively square had grown so quiet all at once. Henna turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the atmosphere around her shift in a way she could not yet understand. A gloved hand reached out and gently took her hand, the unexpected touch stopping her thoughts for a moment. Evangeline stepped forward in an elegant white dress, while Jelly walked beside her, guiding her gently as the crimson light behind them made the moment feel almost otherworldly. Evangeline walked forward with a calm expression, her crimson eyes steady and distant as an ominous aura quietly gathered around her. Servants quietly set dishes along the long dining table as Evangeline sat at the head, the morning meal being prepared in calm, orderly silence. Evangeline rested her chin on her hand as she glanced toward the entrance, wondering when Henna and Kana would return, since it had already been quite a while without any news. Evangeline's thoughts drifted far away, wondering if her parents might also be waiting for her somewhere, feeling the same quiet longing she carried in her heart. Lost in thought, Evangeline absent-mindedly cut into the steak on her plate, her mind lingering on whether her parents were safe and doing well. Evangeline quietly admitted that she missed them, while the servant behind her calmly reminded her that the sisters Henna and Kana had probably not even left the event yet, urging her to simply focus on finishing her meal. Evangeline sighed softly, her red eyes lowering as the uneasy feeling in her chest refused to fade. A maid hurried forward carrying a bowl of salad, then suddenly slipped and spilled the vegetables across the floor with a startled gasp. The maid immediately dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the spilled vegetables while apologizing over and over, her voice trembling with fear. Evangeline let out a small sigh and waved her hand lightly, telling the maid that if she was thirsty, she should simply ask the butler to bring her some water. The maid quickly bowed and hurried out of the dining hall, another servant following behind as they rushed to clean up the mess. Left alone at the long table, Evangeline slumped slightly in her chair, thinking about Henna and Kana and how much she missed them. the loneliness in the quiet hall beginning to ache in her chest. Evangeline suddenly stood up and said they should go find Kana, while Jelly watched from beside her and teased that she might be pampering the human girl a little too much. Jelly gently caught Evangeline's hand and told her she was being overprotective. Jelly took Evangeline's hand, and in the next moment, the two of them vanished, instantly teleporting to the carriage waiting outside. After teleporting to the carriage, Jelly complained that he had already moved the carriage so they would not stand out, while Evangeline smiled brightly and praised him for doing a good job. Evangeline blinked in confusion, tilting her head slightly as something unexpected caught her attention. From inside the carriage, Evangeline noticed the commotion outside, where the same man who had confronted Kana earlier stood among the crowd, while Jelly pointed out that they could not step out yet because they would look far too shabby among the nobles gathered there. The man smirked arrogantly as he mocked the young lady of House Rohanson, saying that if she truly cared about her maids, she should send them to the temple where everyone could see her generosity, instead of letting them wear such cheap clothes. The man laughed cruelly as he mocked the Rohanson family, sneering that if their daughter had been abandoned by the Duchy of Hoshakin, then it was no wonder she could not even afford proper clothes for her maids. Hearing his words, Evangeline's expression hardened as anger rose in her chest, furious that someone would dare speak that way about her girls. Evangeline suddenly pushed the carriage door open, deciding that if she waited any longer, the villains would only keep talking. Jelly stepped out first and offered his hand, and Evangeline took it as she gracefully stepped down from the carriage, her white dress flowing softly around her. Evangeline looked at him calmly and asked the young lord exactly what kind of conversation he thought he was having with her girls. The two girls suddenly noticed Evangeline nearby, both of them turning their heads in surprise as their eyes met her figure standing not far away. Kana suddenly brightened and called out to Evangeline with a cheerful voice, running toward her with an excited smile while Henna followed quietly behind. Kana hurried up to Evangeline and spoke with concern, saying she had been worried and came out to look for her while Henna watched the meeting quietly from behind. Henna watched Evangeline and Kana quietly, her hand resting near her collar as worry crossed her face, thinking that if Evangeline had arrived even a little later, something terrible might have happened. Kana lowered her gaze with a faint smile, thinking quietly that if Evangeline had arrived even a little later, that man would have done something terrible to her. Henna stepped forward firmly and stopped that thought at once, quietly telling herself that was not what happened. Henna stepped forward and thought calmly that Kana had grown up inside the house and knew little about the outside world, so she probably only spoke bluntly because she did not know how to deal with nobles. Henna thought quietly that someone as weak as Kana could never have the strength to harm a man. Henna rejected the thought immediately, telling herself firmly that such a thing could never be true. Evangeline stepped forward and calmly asked the young master what he had been discussing with her servants while Kana and Henna stood behind her. The young master looked startled and asked if she was Lady Rohanson, and Evangeline calmly confirmed that she was Evangeline Rohanson. The young master asked in confusion if they had come together and why Evangeline got off the carriage so late, and Evangeline replied calmly that she had a weak body, so she had been resting in the carriage before asking who he was. The young master quickly introduced himself as Annalyn of the Marquess Benzine family, explaining that he thought they were visiting for the first time, so he had been trying to guide them. Evangeline let out a quiet sound of understanding, watching Annalyn with a faint smile while thinking that the man was shamelessly making excuses. Evangeline looked at Annalyn with calm, red eyes and said she thought he was joking, because if he truly came from a Marquess family, he should know the difference between the Rohanson County and the Hosaquin Duchy. Annalyn froze in place, his expression stiffening as Evangeline's words caught him completely off guard. Evangeline lightly gathered the edge of her dress and spoke calmly, deciding to end the conversation there. Evangeline lifted her dress slightly and looked down at it with calm red eyes, wondering if she had dressed too poorly for the temple even though she had only worn something from the dressing room without buying new clothes. Annalyn hurriedly denied it and stumbled over his words, trying to correct himself as he stepped forward in confusion. The knight standing behind Annalyn calmly spoke up, saying that the temple was grand and that no matter what Evangeline wore, it would still be appropriate. Gabriel stepped forward behind Annalyn and said calmly that the temple would always welcome Evangeline, while Annalyn turned in surprise and addressed him as Sir Gabriel. Gabriel looked at Evangeline and said calmly that, since she came out late, the young Master Benzine must have been attending to her. Then he thanked Annalyn for it. Annalyn quickly shook his head and bowed with flustered respect, saying it was an honor if he had been of help to Gabriel. Annalyn hurriedly excused himself and ran off in embarrassment, saying he had something urgent to attend to, while Gabriel watched him leave in silence. Evangeline thought to herself that the man might have solved the situation immediately if he had arrived earlier, wondering why Gabriel had not appeared when Kana was in trouble. Gabriel asked Evangeline politely if she had come to see the painting, and Evangeline replied that she originally planned to send only Kana and Henna, but became worried and curious about the Grand Temple, so she came as well. Evangeline suggested they go see the painting since they might have to leave soon, and Kana happily agreed and asked what Evangeline thought about it. Evangeline smiled gently and said she would pray, while Kana and Henna looked at the painting, thinking to herself that she did not want to see something that looked like a corpse painting. Gabriel said he would assign a knight to accompany them. Then he called Uriel to step forward. Gabriel instructed Uriel to escort Evangeline to the prayer room, and Uriel bowed respectfully and accepted the order. Uriel respectfully asked Evangeline to follow him to the prayer room, while Gabriel said he would guide Kana and Henna to see the painting. Evangeline walked calmly behind Uriel, and thought with relief that it was fortunate Gabriel did not insist on guiding her himself. Evangeline glanced back briefly and hoped that Gabriel would completely lose interest in her after this. The Grand Temple stood tall under the clear sky, its towering spires and vast arches stretching upward in quiet majesty. Gabriel said he heard Kana and Henna were helping, so suspicion would not fall on Evangeline. Then he asked how the progress was, and Kana replied that, unfortunately, there had been no progress. Gabriel said that more and more people were coming to see the painting, and that the rumors about it kept spreading from person to person. Henna looked toward the crowd in the distance and asked if those people were also here to see the painting. Gabriel walked ahead and replied that yes, most of them had come to see the painting. Gabriel added that some visitors came to the temple for reasons other than the painting. Clear water flowed from the fountain as a visitor quietly scooped some into their hands. The woman hurriedly splashed the water over her face, desperately washing herself as if seeking purification. Henna said she had never seen a noble do that before, and asked if people could drink water from that fountain, and Gabriel replied that they could. Gabriel explained that the water from that fountain could be drunk because it was holy water. Henna froze in shock, her eyes widening as she asked quietly what Gabriel had just said. Gabriel added that not every visitor was allowed to drink it, because the holy water was a benefit given only to patrons who donated generously. Gabriel said the display of holy water was merely a performance meant to show the temple's prosperity. Kana gently held Henna's trembling hand, trying to steady her as they walked forward together. Kana looked at Henna with concern, noticing the fear on Henna's face as she quietly held her hand. Kana looked ahead and asked Gabriel where the painting was. Gabriel raised his hand slightly and pointed ahead, telling Kana that the painting was over there. Gabriel explained that the reactions of those who saw the painting were completely divided, with one side finding it extremely beautiful. Gabriel continued that the other side found the painting deeply unpleasant. Kana looked up toward the hall and wondered what kind of painting it could be. Henna suddenly covered her mouth in shock, a wave of nausea rising in her chest as the image before her felt like something twisted that people called God's blessing. Henna stared at the grotesque image in disbelief, wondering how something like this painting could possibly be called sacred. Henna thought with horror that even the final moments of the most wretched person would still be more beautiful than the nightmare shown in that painting. Kana looked at the painting with calm eyes and quietly said that she agreed. Kana gazed at the painting with fascination and said it was truly beautiful, while Henna stared at her in shock and whispered Kana's name. Henna looked up at the disturbing painting as the figures within it seemed to chant the name Rachel, their voices begging for salvation to descend upon them. Henna clutched her head in distress and said this was ridiculous, unable to understand how anyone could look at such a thing and offer praise. The sight was so unpleasant that it made her nauseous. Kana smiled faintly while looking at the painting and calmly said that she agreed. Kana looked at the painting with shining eyes and said it was truly beautiful, while Henna stared at her in disbelief. Henna stared at Kana in confusion, thinking that if Kana had seen the same thing she saw, then she could never call that painting beautiful, which meant Kana must be seeing it in a completely different form. Henna wondered what kind of magic the painter had used to create such an ambiguous picture, then realized the temple kept the painting because the divided reactions only made it seem more mysterious. Kana quietly looked at the painting and thought that no matter how much someone tried to explain it to those who believed it was beautiful, it would only sound like an attempt to insult the painting. Gabriel said the painting seemed to look different to Kana, because to him it appeared incredibly unpleasant. Then he asked what made the difference between them. Gabriel looked thoughtfully at the painting and said he wondered about it, mentioning that people often claimed the difference came from devotion. A knight hurried over and called out to the commander, and Gabriel turned his head slightly as he recognized the approaching man as Rafaela. Rafaela stopped before Gabriel and said something urgent had come up, telling him he needed to come right away. Gabriel asked Kana and Henna to wait there for a moment, saying he would return shortly, and Henna answered that they would wait. Gabriel left with Rafaela, the two knights walking quickly across the hall. Henna clasped her hands together and thought that if it were up to her, she would leave that place immediately. But she could not do that now. Henna thought that since Kana was still staring blankly at the painting, she could not simply leave on her own. Kana suddenly spoke softly and called out to Henna, addressing her as sister. Kana turned to Henna with a faint smile and asked if the painting looked different to her. Kana said that to her, the patterns in the painting looked exactly like countless eyes staring back. Henna stared at Kana in shock, realizing what she said could not possibly be true. Henna froze as she realized that what Kana described was the same thing she had seen, and that meant Kana was looking at the very same nightmare. Henna realized with horror that Kana was looking at the exact same grotesque form she had seen, yet Kana was still calling it beautiful. Henna looked at Kana in disbelief, thinking that no normal person would call those grotesque eyes beautiful, because anyone seeing a human eye separated from a body would only feel horror. Henna fell silent as unease crept across her face, a cold realization slowly settling in her mind. Henna stared at Kana with growing dread, realizing that something inside Kana had broken somewhere. Henna wondered if Kana had changed after being kidnapped by Dono, or after meeting Evangeline. She could not tell which moment had broken something inside her. Henna thought that perhaps it had always been like this since Kana was young, something hidden deep inside her frail body. Yet she could not find any words she could possibly say to her sister. Henna thought that she could never tell Kana she was not normal, because Kana had spent her whole life sick and had only just begun to smile again, and Henna could not bear to wound her like that. Henna thought that since Kana had sworn loyalty to Evangeline, it might be better to simply leave her as she was, if staying by Evangeline's side was what Kana wanted. Henna gently reached out and placed her hand on Kana's shoulder. Kana looked surprised as Henna suddenly held her shoulders, and Henna leaned closer and told Kana to listen carefully. Henna gripped Kana's shoulders and urgently told her not to tell anyone that she saw eyes, insisting that she should say the painting looked holy like everyone else. Henna explained that the people of the temple believed the painting was holy, so it would not become a problem, and Kana smiled and said she understood. Henna looked at Kana carefully and thought that even seeing her like this, she could not sense anything strange from Kana at all. Henna wondered if she was only forcing herself to rationalize everything, because she could not face the truth about her sister. Henna lowered her head and rejected the thought immediately, telling herself that it was not true. Henna stood silently and thought to herself that she would always stand by her sister. Henna slowly turned her head back, her green eyes steady as she looked toward Kana. Henna made up her mind that no matter what happened, she would always put her sister first. The quiet hall of the temple stood still beneath the high arches, sunlight spilling softly across the marble floor and the rows of plants. Evangeline quietly turned her head as a faint sound reached her ears in the silent hall. Evangeline suddenly stopped, still half drowsy as a thin line of drool slipped from the corner of her mouth like someone who had just woken up. Evangeline blinked sleepily, a bit of drool still at the corner of her mouth as she wondered why the place felt so warm and made her so drowsy. Evangeline rubbed her head and realized that instead of praying, she had accidentally fallen asleep and taken a nap. Evangeline thought that if she came to a place like this, she might be able to connect with a god as a transmigrator's perk. Yet she could not see anything at all. Evangeline sighed to herself and admitted that she might have been a little too optimistic. Uriel opened the door and asked Evangeline if she had waited long, and Evangeline replied that it was not long at all since there were believers who prayed there all day. Uriel asked if he should escort Evangeline to the commander, and Evangeline hesitated before asking if she could request a small favor first. Evangeline said she would like to buy some holy water, thinking that if she did not have a transmigrator's perk, she should at least stock up on healing items. Evangeline thought that even though holy water did not seem to work on her, it could still be useful for other situations. Evangeline smiled brightly and thought that even if it did not work on her, there would surely be many other ways to use it. Then she wondered if reverse appraisal would be fine too. Evangeline's eyes lit up when she saw a display filled with many bottles of holy water neatly arranged on the shelf. Uriel praised Evangeline in amazement and said the amount she bought was something he could not have paid, even if he spent several years of his salary, while Evangeline thought he was acting more like a store clerk than a knight. Evangeline looked at the pile of holy water bottles and wondered how she was supposed to carry all of them, thinking it might be a bit troublesome. Evangeline suddenly called out to Jelly and raised her hand slightly, as if she had just thought of a solution. Jelly looked startled and asked Evangeline if she was expecting him to carry all of that, then wondered if he should be the one to carry it. Jelly recoiled in protest and shouted that it was far too much, complaining that Evangeline was worse than a demon for expecting that. Evangeline looked at Jelly with calm, red eyes and told him to listen carefully when she spoke. Evangeline thought Jelly was only acting dramatic because he did not want to carry the luggage, even though it was not that heavy. Jelly reluctantly hugged the heavy box of holy water bottles, sweating and trembling as he struggled to hold them all. Evangeline walked ahead without looking back, and thought that if Jelly wanted, he could follow her, since he was a werewolf and would probably find her by scent anyway. Evangeline suddenly paused in front of the door, her expression shifting slightly as something caught her attention. Rafaela stood near the fountain, speaking quietly with Daisy, the two of them facing each other in the quiet hall. Evangeline looked toward the fountain and wondered if those two people were Daisy and Rafaela. Gabriel crossed his arms and looked at the painting with a cold expression. He said the painting looked different to Kana, but to him, it felt extremely disturbing, while Henna lowered her gaze thoughtfully and wondered what caused the difference. Gabriel looked down calmly and said it was hard to say. People claimed the difference came from faith, but he did not seem completely convinced. Rafaela hurried over and called out to Gabriel, saying, "Commander, here you are!" Gabriel turned his head slightly and spoke Rafaela's name. Rafaela leaned forward slightly and said something urgent had come up. He told Gabriel he needed to come at once. Gabriel turned to Kana and Henna and politely asked them to wait there for a moment because he needed to step away briefly. Henna nodded and answered that they would wait right there. Gabriel turned and walked away across the quiet hall, his cloak swaying slightly behind him. Gabriel stopped near the entrance and asked Rafaela what it was. Rafaela replied that they had a witness who came to testify about the painting. Rafaela said he investigated whether the witness was reliable and discovered that she was a maid who once served Evangeline Rohanson and later ran away, so he first checked the rumors surrounding Evangeline. Rafaela said the maid claimed she witnessed Evangeline come back from the dead and also saw her use the magic circle from Donau's painting to summon something. Rafaela added that whatever Evangeline summoned with that magic circle remained unknown. Daisy stood quietly between two knights at the entrance of the grand hall, her hands clasped nervously as the guards escorted her inside. Daisy lowered her gaze and said the thing she saw was definitely not an angel. Daisy said Priest Virga summoned something like a demon using that magic circle. Daisy said the people killed by that demon had their severed heads reattached. Daisy said the dead people moved normally, as if they had never died. Only a thin, red line across their necks revealed the place where their heads had been severed. Daisy clasped her trembling hands and said she came to the temple to check the painting Priest Virga supposedly saw. When she found the summoning circle in the painting, she decided to testify because she knew it had to be destroyed. Gabriel listened in silence, his blue eyes steady as he quietly considered Daisy's testimony. Daisy said the dead were killed and revived by a demon. Daisy said that, unlike the others, Evangeline Rohanson had no red line across her neck. Her body remained completely clean. Gabriel sat in silence and thought that both were revived beings. Yet, Evangeline was different. He wondered why she alone was not the same. Gabriel narrowed his eyes slightly and wondered what made Evangeline so special. Gabriel recalled the day when the flames danced around them, the radiant figure of Evangeline standing in the blazing light. Gabriel remembered the sight of Evangeline, her white hair dyed vermilion by the firelight, the image remaining vividly in his mind. Gabriel thought Evangeline was like a flower blooming on a withered, leafless tree, a corpse moving in defiance of God's authority. Such a fascinating existence. Gabriel thought the feeling was not awe, but something closer to fear. Gabriel thought that if the entity wearing Evangeline Rohanson's skin ever grew tired of role-playing and decided to stop, there was no telling what might happen. Gabriel stood quietly and realized that was exactly why he found himself wanting to help Evangeline Rohanson. Gabriel called Rafaela's name as Rafaela stepped closer behind him. Gabriel calmly told Rafaela to bring in the guests who came with him. Rafaela opened the door and announced that he had brought the guests. Gabriel looked toward the door and calmly told Rafaela to show them in, while Daisy stepped quietly into the room behind him. Daisy stepped into the room and looked up in surprise when she saw Henna and Kana. Henna called Daisy's name in confusion and asked why she was there. Henna looked at Daisy in surprise and said she was told Daisy had gone blind. Then she asked if Daisy was all right. Daisy froze in shock as she looked at Henna, her eyes trembling as if she had not expected to see her there. Daisy stammered Henna's name in shock. Gabriel looked toward her and asked who Henna was. Henna stepped forward and said this one was her younger sister Kana. She explained that they recently started working together at the Rohanson mansion. Daisy suddenly clutched her head in panic, trembling as she gasped in horror and wondered what she had done. Daisy lowered her head in panic and said she should leave now. Gabriel reached out slightly and reminded her that her testimony was not finished. Daisy looked at Gabriel in panic and shouted that she had already told him everything. She demanded to know if that was not enough for her testimony. Gabriel turned away with a troubled expression and wondered if bringing the two together had been a mistake. Then he told Rafaela to escort Daisy out of the temple. Rafaela gestured toward the exit and told Daisy to come this way as he escorted her out. Daisy stopped in front of Henna, the two women facing each other in uneasy silence. Daisy leaned closer to Henna and whispered something softly into her ear. After whispering to Henna, Daisy quietly turned and walked away, while Henna remained standing there in stunned silence. Gabriel called out to Henna from behind as she stood still. Gabriel looked at Henna and asked what Daisy had just said to her. Henna clasped her hands tightly and quietly said it was nothing. Henna forced a faint smile and said it was nothing at all. Gabriel narrowed his eyes slightly and thought that Henna was being far less cooperative than he expected. Gabriel looked ahead in silence and decided that if Henna would not speak, then he would simply help Evangeline Rohanson another way. The quiet sound of water flowing through the fountain echoed softly as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, the scene slowly shifting elsewhere. Evangeline paused near the doorway, her red eyes lifting slightly as if she had just noticed something. Evangeline looked toward Rafaela and Daisy in the distance and wondered who those people were. Uriel stepped up beside Evangeline and called out to Rafaela. Rafaela smiled in surprise when he saw Uriel. Then his gaze shifted to Evangeline as he addressed her as Lady Rohanson. Evangeline smiled gently and greeted Rafaela. Rafaela introduced himself as Rafaela of the Pararos Knights and said they had met before during the fire. He asked if Evangeline remembered. Rafaela thanked Evangeline for coming because Gabriel requested her cooperation. Then he cheerfully asked if she had time to look around the temple and said the place was truly grand and magnificent. Rafaela pointed toward Daisy and asked Evangeline if she remembered her, explaining that Daisy used to work at the Rohanson mansion. Evangeline looked at Daisy and said she seemed familiar, but she could not quite remember. Then she wondered what Daisy's name was. Daisy looked at Evangeline in shock and asked if she really did not know her name. Evangeline calmly said she had lost her memory. Daisy lowered her head and introduced herself as Daisy. Evangeline then asked if Daisy quit the mansion because of her. Daisy lowered her gaze and realized Evangeline truly did not remember her. Daisy forced a bitter smile and thought about how wicked Evangeline had been, realizing it was trembling over something as small as a brief conversation. Evangeline quietly thought she really needed to work on improving her image. Then she gently placed her hand on Daisy's shoulder and said, Daisy must have been terrified, but she should not be afraid. Evangeline smiled gently and placed her hand over her chest as she told Daisy she would compensate her however she wanted. Evangeline smiled softly, but her red eyes turned cold as she added that she would compensate Daisy however she wanted, on the condition that Daisy stopped going around and talking about her. Evangeline calmly told Daisy that if Daisy wanted something, she would grant any reward she desired, but only on the condition that Daisy would stop going around and talking about her. Evangeline smiled faintly and told Daisy that if there was a wish Daisy wanted granted, she could come find her, and Evangeline would listen. Daisy stared at Evangeline in shock, her body trembling as she struggled to process what Evangeline had just said. Evangeline tilted her head slightly in confusion and wondered why Daisy was reacting like that, as Daisy lowered her gaze while trembling. Evangeline's red eye widened slightly as a sudden thought struck her, and she nervously wondered if Daisy had misunderstood something. Evangeline suddenly panicked in her thoughts and realized she already had a terrible reputation for being involved in Donau's death. She worried people might twist Daisy's story and frame her with a villainous crime. So in her mind, she desperately imagined shouting, "Begone, villainess!" accusations, while complaining about the unfair karma she had to carry. Evangeline suddenly grabbed Daisy by the shoulders and urgently asked who it was. Evangeline demanded to know who Daisy told. Daisy panicked and stammered that Sir Gabriel already knew. Evangeline relaxed slightly and thought that would be fine, because Gabriel seemed kind enough that even if he was dragged into something strange, it would probably still be all right. Evangeline thought that, at the very least, Gabriel would not do anything that could harm her. Just then, Jelly stepped forward and said, "My lady, he was there." Evangeline complained that Jelly was seriously slow and only showing up now. Jelly awkwardly replied that he still followed her orders and came. Jelly glanced toward Daisy with narrowed eyes and muttered in surprise when he noticed her. Daisy suddenly stiffened in shock when she saw Jelly, her eyes widening as fear rushed across her face. Daisy nervously stammered as she stepped back in panic. Evangeline looked between Daisy and Jelly with curiosity and asked if the two of them knew each other. Daisy hurriedly said she would leave now, as Rafaela stepped forward and said he would escort her out, sister. Daisy quickly said it was okay and pointed out that the carriage stop was right over there. Rafaela hesitated and replied that yes, that was true, but he still tried to say something as Daisy rushed away, leaving him standing there in surprise. Daisy hurried away across the hall without looking back, while Rafaela reached out his hand as if trying to stop her. Evangeline casually said Daisy was gone. Rafaela glanced after her and agreed that it looked that way. Rafaela cheerfully asked if Evangeline and Daisy had a good talk, and added that he kept both ears tightly shut to protect their privacy. Evangeline scratched her head and said she was not sure because Daisy did not seem to want to talk much. She added, honestly, that she did not even remember who Daisy was. Rafaela blinked in confusion and quietly asked what. Rafaela laughed lightly and said that was understandable, because he probably would not recognize all of his own servants either. Evangeline looked at Rafaela in mild confusion and wondered why someone so kind could speak so bluntly. Evangeline thought that Daisy had literally run away in the middle of their conversation. She wondered if a normal person would not at least ask why. Evangeline wondered in her thoughts if this was what people meant by the hidden black-bellied type. Then she asked Rafaela which young master he was referring to. Rafaela cheerfully explained that he was Evangeline's escort. Evangeline then realized he was a knight and said she had not noticed the sword at his side before. Jelly shrugged lightly and said he was still good even without a sword. Rafaela smiled slightly and said he understood. Rafaela said Evangeline would be visiting the captain in the knight's reception room before returning home, so he should go back with her. Then he called for Uriel to lead the way. Rafaela suddenly said that, speaking of, that he had been curious about something. Rafaela called Jelly's name and asked how Jelly knew Daisy. Jelly wondered if Evangeline meant the girl from earlier and said they had only given her a little help. Evangeline nervously asked if he had not bullied her. Jelly shook his head and said there was no way because he had helped Daisy, explaining that he got her out and escaped with her. Evangeline hummed thoughtfully and said she thought she understood the general idea now. Evangeline thought that if Jelly had been injured that badly, the reason was probably slave traders, and she recalled that he said they escaped together afterward. Evangeline concluded that Daisy and Jelly were probably both captured by slave traders back then. Evangeline realized Daisy must have been frightened when she saw Jelly, because it brought back memories of being captured with him, the kind of painful memory people usually call trauma. Jelly said he cleaned everything up afterward. Evangeline thought that meant Daisy even took care of the slave traders on top of it. Evangeline thought that kind of action deserved some praise. I looked at Evangeline and remarked that she seemed really close with her bodyguard. Evangeline thought it might be a little awkward for Rafaela's subordinate if his superior had a crush while he was busy patting another man's head. Evangeline quickly laughed and said not at all. She insisted that she and Jelly were absolutely not close. Rafaela looked at Evangeline quietly and said he understood. Rafaela turned and walked ahead calmly, replying that he saw. The scene shifted away from the temple to a quiet countryside village surrounded by fields and distant mountains. Jim the Fetty wandered far and wide in search of inspiration, determined to paint a masterpiece that would surpass his previous work. Since Jim no Fetty once found inspiration in Dono's death, he naturally drifted toward places where the scent of death still lingered. That was how Jim discovered a corpse he found greatly to his liking. Jim praised the child's corpse in front of the grieving old woman and asked if he could paint it. But no grieving family could tolerate what they saw as desecration. The old woman cursed Jim and chased him away in anger. Jim, unable to give up on the painting, turned back with determination still burning in his eyes. Jim, unable to abandon the painting, ended up stealing the body. The old woman flew into a rage and rallied the villagers, and together they tracked Jim down. The enraged villagers spread through the village and the mountains until they finally tracked Jim down. The villagers caught Jim and beat him to death. That was when something strange happened. At the moment of his death, as if following its master into the grave, one of the villagers suddenly pointed in shock and shouted for everyone to look over there. The villagers watched in shock as Jim's painting suddenly began to burn. The villagers panicked and shouted that the painting had suddenly caught fire out of nowhere. The villagers shouted in alarm and someone yelled for the knights to be called as the burning painting blazed fiercely before them. Rafaela and Uriel walked ahead through the hall, while Evangeline followed behind with Jelly quietly standing beside her. Evangeline paused slightly and wondered why it had suddenly become so noisy. Rafaela and Uriel walked through the temple corridor when distant screams suddenly echoed through the hall. Rafaela turned his head toward the sound and asked what those screams were, while Uriel frowned slightly and said something must have happened. Rafaela immediately said they should go see what was happening, and the two knights quickly moved toward the direction of the screams. Rafaela looked ahead in alarm as flames suddenly erupted inside the temple. He muttered that a fire had started out of nowhere, while Uriel stared at the burning corridor and said he had a very bad feeling about this. Rafaela stared at the burning scene with sharp eyes and suddenly told Uriel to look at that. People ran through the burning hall in panic as they shouted to the knights for help, begging them to put out the fire while screaming that the painting was burning. Rafaela and Uriel rushed forward through the panicking crowd as people surrounded them shouting "Sir Knight" and begging them to stop the fire. Rafaela looked around at the terrified crowd reaching toward them in panic and muttered in disbelief that, good grief, they were all losing it. Rafaela frowned as he looked toward the burning hall and muttered that for a painting that drove people this mad, it might be better to just let it burn. A green-haired man suddenly pushed through the chaotic crowd rushing toward the burning hall. He shook his head and repeatedly said no. The green-haired man stared at the burning flames with trembling eyes and sweat running down his face. He said he could not let that painting burn. The green-haired man rushed into the flames and grabbed the burning painting with both hands, desperately trying to pull it away from the fire. Rafaela looked ahead in shock and called out Michael's name, wondering what he was doing there when he was supposed to be locked inside his room. Uriel shouted for Michael to drop the burning painting immediately as Michael stood in the flames clutching it, while Rafaela reached out toward him in alarm and called Michael's name. Rafaela shouted at Michael to get a hold of himself and let the painting go, while Michael groaned in pain as the flames burned around him, but still refused to release it. Rafaela gritted his teeth as he looked at Michael burning in the flames, and cursed that at this rate, Michael would burn to death. He wondered if he had to use force to drag these people away. Rafaela suddenly froze, as if hearing something beside his ear, as though a corpse had just whispered to him. Rafaela suddenly felt the heat around him vanish, as a cold chill quietly replaced it. Rafaela felt a terrifying presence behind him as something enormous seemed to stare directly at him with a massive crimson eye. Evangeline Rohanson walked calmly through the burning hall filled with chaos and flames, her white dress flowing quietly as the terrified crowd parted around her. The people clinging to Rafaela in panic slowly turned their heads and stared blankly at Evangeline Rohanson as she walked through the burning hall. Their groans and their screams suddenly stopped at once, as if they had all been nothing but lies. Thanks to that, Evangeline Rohanson calmly walked through the flames and reached Michael's side as he knelt while clutching the burning painting. Michael hugged the painting tightly to his chest and slowly lifted his head to look up at Evangeline. And in that instant, Rafaela stood frozen as he watched the scene unfolding before him. Rafaela witnessed the birth of a fanatic as Michael looked up at Evangeline with burning eyes, longing, shock, reverence, and ecstasy overflowing within him. Emotion so overwhelming that no amount of adjectives could fully contain them. When Michael's eyes met Evangeline's, what exactly was he seeing before him? Evangeline slowly raised her hand behind her. Evangeline extended her hand behind her, and Jelly immediately stepped forward and placed something into it. Evangeline calmly took the small vial placed in her hand and held it lightly between her fingers. Evangeline loosened her grip and casually dropped several small vials of holy water onto the floor. The vials shattered across the floor as holy water spilled out, and Evangeline calmly tipped the remaining bottle, letting the liquid pour down over Michael and the burning painting. Uriel rushed forward and caught Michael's collapsing body, calling out to Sir Michel as he supported him. Evangeline smiled calmly and said that, since Michael had been doused in holy water, he would not need further treatment. Evangeline looked down at Michael with a faint smile, and quietly remarked that now people were suddenly talking about morals and ethics, for real. Evangeline glanced at the crowd standing around the flames, and thought that instead of rushing to save a burning man, they were all just watching, like a group of spectators filming an accident. Uriel supported Michael's burned body, and thought that if Evangeline had dragged him away just a little slower, someone definitely would have died. Evangeline let out a tired sigh and thought that, now that the tension was gone, she suddenly felt completely drained. Someone calmly spoke to Evangeline and said it seemed they had arrived a moment too late. A middle-aged priest stepped forward to greet Evangeline Rohanson and sincerely thanked her in the name of Bishop Zabaniah for saving one of the temple's knights. The priest extended his hand and said it was not much of a reward, but the temple would reimburse all the holy water Evangeline had used to put out the fire. And Evangeline inwardly felt relieved that she would not have to buy holy water again. Evangeline handed the remaining holy water to Jelly and told him to take it to the carriage before he started complaining about being overworked. Jelly looked exhausted as he carried the load, while Evangeline cheerfully urged him to hurry before she really started overworking him. Jelly trudged away carrying the load of holy water bottles, while Evangeline quietly watched him leave. Nearby, the kind-faced priest approached Rafaela and began speaking to him, while Evangeline noticed them from a distance and thought the priest seemed to be saying something to the knight, but his voice was too quiet for her to hear. The priest spoke quietly with Rafaela, while Evangeline watched from afar and felt certain he kept glancing toward her, making her wonder if they were talking about her behind her back. After a moment, Rafaela covered his mouth in thought and politely excused himself, saying he should go see Sir Michel, who was still lying down. The priest told Rafaela to go ahead and see Michael, while he stayed behind to escort Evangeline, and Rafaela thanked him before leaving. Evangeline smiled brightly and thanked the priest, saying she had just been wondering where her companions had gone. Evangeline thought that Kana and Henna were probably waiting for her somewhere nearby. The quiet temple hall echoed softly as footsteps approached from behind. Rafaela stopped and turned slightly before speaking, apologizing for his late greeting. Rafaela thanked Evangeline for saving Michael and explained that Michael had lost consciousness, but thanks to the holy water, he would survive, and that the knights were truly grateful. Just then, Uriel carried the unconscious Michael on his back and walked past them through the temple hall. Evangeline smiled brightly and said it was only what anyone should have done, while secretly thinking that she was finally washing away her bad reputation. After that, Evangeline walked through the temple hall together with the two knights as sunlight streamed through the tall windows. The temple staff began telling the worshippers that it was time to head home since it was dangerous to remain after a fire. People slowly started leaving the hall in small groups as the crowd gradually dispersed. A man in the dispersing crowd noticed a woman still standing still and wondered why she was not moving, asking if she was not going back. The woman calmly replied that the painting had already burned away and asked what he was still looking at. The young woman quietly raised her hand and pointed somewhere in the distance. The priest followed the direction of the young lady's gaze. The priest suddenly realized something and looked ahead in surprise. Only then did he wonder how he had failed to notice sooner that everyone's eyes were fixed on that pale, beautiful young lady. Evangeline left the temple together with the others and quietly stepped out into the open courtyard. As she walked away, Evangeline let out a small breath and thought that she suddenly felt nervous. Evangeline thought that if Daisy had told Gabriel about her villainous past, she would have to work harder to improve her image. As she walked through the temple corridor, Evangeline worried that if Gabriel changed his mind about helping her, she would be left without an ally. Evangeline looked up and thought, her red eyes thoughtful as she walked through the temple corridor. She realized she needed to carefully check what Gabriel thought of her as Rafaela and Uriel walked ahead of her. Up ahead, Gabriel stood together with Kana and Henna, while two knights waited nearby as they talked. Gabriel noticed Evangeline approaching and greeted her respectfully as Lady Rohanson. Evangeline stepped forward beside Rafaela and answered calmly that he had been waiting for her. Kana suddenly rushed forward and threw her arms around Evangeline, calling out to her excitedly. Evangeline steadied the girl and gently warned that it was dangerous, while Kana quickly apologized with a small laugh. Evangeline blinked in slight surprise as Kana clung to her. In the distance, Henna only stood there, staring blankly, even though she would normally stop Kana from acting like that. Evangeline leaned closer and quietly asked Kana if she had fought with her sister. Kana softly replied that she had not, explaining that Henna had been like that ever since hearing what Daisy said earlier, which must have been so shocking that she could not even focus on her little sister. Gabriel stepped forward and politely called out to Evangeline. He gestured toward a nearby seat and invited her to sit down, as Evangeline reminded herself that Gabriel was the important one right now. Gabriel asked where Rafaela and Uriel were, saying he thought he had asked Uriel to escort the young lady. He then explained that Uriel was currently in the infirmary because Michael had been injured, and Evangeline began asking what exactly had happened. Gabriel sat down and calmly thanked Evangeline for saving Michael. He then added that since Bishop Zabaniah had already come to the scene, the incident with the burning painting would likely be smoothed over, as the bishop had never liked the painting much. Gabriel added that with the painting destroyed, fewer people would question the Donau case, and that their investigation so far would also help settle the matter. Evangeline then asked what he had been working on since she heard he had been there instead of at the painting, and Gabriel explained that a witness had come forward, prompting Evangeline to ask what Daisy had said about her. Gabriel lowered his gaze and calmly said that Daisy had not spoken about Evangeline at all. Evangeline looked surprised by the answer, thinking it was strange because Daisy had clearly said she told him something earlier. Gabriel handed Evangeline the written testimony left by the witness who had just departed. Evangeline took the paper and began reading it, seeing the part about Donau's painting being used to call something. Reading the testimony, Evangeline suddenly wondered how far the summoning circle had already spread. She then thought that perhaps the burning of the painting earlier had something to do with that abbot. Evangeline quickly turned the page and continued reading, only to suddenly see her own name written in the testimony. Before she could read further, the letters on the page suddenly distorted and glitched, as if something was interfering, leaving her startled and trying to stop it. Evangeline stared at the distorted page in shock, wondering why her automatic translator perk was suddenly malfunctioning and breaking perfectly normal letters. Frustrated, she complained in her thoughts that even divine beasts received better treatment than this. Gabriel calmly said he had not heard anything, while Evangeline inwardly panicked, realizing there was no way he could know she was unable to read the page properly right now. Seeing her reaction, Gabriel told her she could take the paper with her if she wanted, and Evangeline thought that, judging from his attitude, it might not be something too serious. Evangeline looked at Gabriel and thought that he seemed very calm, but aside from his handsome face, she could not read anything else from him. Deciding to deal with it later, Evangeline said she would take the paper and read it again later, then asked Kana to hold it for her. Kana took the paper from Evangeline and looked down at it quietly. Her green eyes lingered on the page as she fell into silence while reading it. Evangeline called out to Kana when she noticed her sudden silence. Kana quickly smiled and assured her that she would make sure nothing happened to the paper. Evangeline suddenly wondered if she had imagined it when Kana looked strangely gleeful for a brief moment. Gabriel then asked if the answer satisfied her, and Evangeline replied that it was more than enough. Gabriel calmly reminded Evangeline that he had told her before that he wanted to help her. Hearing that, Evangeline thought to herself that he was quite the smooth talker, the perfect kind of male lead. A knight arrived and informed Gabriel that Bishop Zabaniah wished to see him for a moment. Gabriel said he would go after escorting Lady Evangeline out, then invited her to leave with him, and she agreed. Evangeline thought she had stayed at the temple a little too long as the carriage waited outside under the evening sky. When they returned, a servant hurried forward with a bright smile and greeted his master, saying he had come back. Evangeline thanked Jelly for waiting as he happily welcomed her back. Just then, Gabriel called out to Lady Rohanson as he raised his hand slightly to stop her. Seeing Evangeline about to step into the carriage, Gabriel thought she might struggle with the high step and offered his hand. Evangeline reached out and lightly placed her hand in his. Their fingers briefly touched as Gabriel helped Evangeline step forward. For a moment their eyes met in silence under the warm light of the sunset. Gabriel gently lifted Evangeline's hand and pressed a respectful kiss to the back of it. Then he straightened and politely bowed to her under the warm evening light. Gabriel softly said he looked forward to the day they would meet again. Evangeline looked up at him in surprise as his words reached her. Evangeline fell silent for a moment, her red eyes widening slightly in surprise. Without another word, she turned and stepped into the carriage while Gabriel stood beside it, watching her leave. The carriage slowly rolled away from the temple through the quiet street under the golden evening sky. Inside the carriage, Evangeline looked down at her hand in confusion, wondering what had just happened a moment ago. Evangeline leaned back inside the carriage and touched her chest, quietly wondering what that feeling just now had been.